This is fall. I know it seems like it's summer somewhere, but it's actually fall. And what we do traditionally here, or at least traditionally for the 5 years that I've been here, is when we get into fall, we do a prosperity series. Once a year, we have a stewardship campaign. So at the end of this month, we'll be asking those who consider themselves to be members of this spiritual community, who consider this to be their spiritual home, to make their pledge, their conscious giving for the next year, so that we know how we can create the budget. So that's what we do. So once a year, I like to talk specifically about prosperity to assist you in being as prosperous as possible. I figure it's kind of a win-win thing. And we'll really get into it in a moment. But the heart of it, and why this is part of what we teach here, is because in our teaching Science of Mind, we are about learning to have a thriving life. Not just surviving, but a thriving life. And I hope that we're teaching that all the time. And in fall, we just take an opportunity to focus it a little bit. And as those of you who have been here know, that each month we've been learning to be awake to another aspect of life. This is our theme this year, is being awake to life. And so this month, to tie it all in, it's being awake to prosperity. And this year, I am using for these talks a classic, it's not that old yet, but it's a book called The 4 Spiritual Laws of Prosperity that was written by Edwene Gaines. Has anybody here seen Edwene Gaines? Oh, you have, good. So you know that she comes out, she's in her 70s now, but I would never dare to ask her age. And she comes out and she's always dressed in some, what we call goddess wear like this. And she'll come out and she looks a little demure because she's from the South. And she looks at you and she says, I am a woman of power. And she stands in it. She doesn't need to say it loud because she knows she's a woman of power. And about, maybe 30 years ago now, or longer, she took on as her divine purpose to be responsible for changing the way all people think about the potential for prosperity and abundance in their lives. She took responsibility for changing the way all people think about the potential for prosperity and abundance in their lives. She said when she took that vow, she said, do I know how to do it? No, I don't have a clue. But that's what I'm here to do. And so after doing seminars all around the country, and probably she's gotten to some other countries in the world, she wrote a neat little book of the 4 laws. And so each week we're going to be looking at one. And by the way, each week, because there's so much material, too much to cover in a Sunday morning talk, we're going to do a workshop each week to go more deeply into whatever that law was, so that you can ask questions, we can do some processes and really help you embody this more. I will strive to give you as much nugget as I can in the talk, so you'll be complete with the talk, but if you really want to wrestle with some of these things, then that's what the workshops are for. So we'll have those every Sunday. So this book and these laws that she has worked with, she experienced these. These are based on her experience, what others have taught her, but what she has proved herself. So there's not one thing I'm going to say here that has not been tested out. And in some ways, I was thinking about this, especially today's talk, it's kind of one of those, you know that phrase, I'm just saying? This is going to be these just saying. Just saying. So, first, before we go into today's spiritual law, let's talk about the definition for prosperity. Those of you who've heard me speak know that I brought down here from Seattle a definition that I love, that is used by Reverend Dr. Kathy Ann Lewis up at the Seattle Center for Spiritual Living. And that is the definition of prosperity as moving forward in joy. Because it's about more than money. It doesn't just mean money, but it's about moving forward in joy, having that kind of life. Edwene defines it this way, that in the 4 major areas of our life, this is what happens. We have a vital, healthy, alive body. We have harmonious, loving relationships that work, as she says, all the time. That work all the time. We have work we love. And we have all the money we can spend. So that's her working definition of prosperity that we will be working with. And she says, here's what it really is. It is that consciousness of God's presence everywhere. That consciousness, that knowing that whatever we step out to create that is following our heart's desire, that presence of God will move through us and help us create it. That we can trust that presence. And that's what's truly prosperous. Can you imagine living your life knowing that whatever you deeply desired, that Spirit would be there to make it manifest? It's the truth that we teach, but do we practice it? That's why we always say, why we sang last week, God is my source. So when we look at the prosperous life and what creates it, we don't look at our job, we don't look at our spouse, our partner, our loved one. We don't look at our doctors. We have all these people in our lives and these things in our lives, and they're important, but they are not the source of the prosperity we are seeking. It all comes from the infinite, from God. These are just channels. You too can be a channel. Who knew? But that means that the people and things on this planet that seems to be the source of our money, our love, they are just channels for the givingness of God. And the more that we can remember that, the less we get rocked when the channel changes. Now, I'm not saying we all want the channels to change all the time. Jack just got married. Oh, hey, let's have the channel change. No, we don't want that. But to remind us that love is ever present and just comes through very different arenas. That substance, that flow, that money comes from God through different channels. So, God as source. God as source. So let's get to the first law. Now, I love that Edwene starts out with this one, because I teach this and I have taught that, but usually as ministers, we kind of wait before we do this one, because we feel like people get a little bit of itchy feet. And again, it just tickles me when this is the first Sunday that people come. But Edwene starts right out with this one because she knows without this, the other ones just are not going to do their thing. The first law, and this is taught by virtually every prosperity teacher in our New Thought denomination that we know of. So that's Edwene Gaines, that's Charles Fillmore, who is the creator of the Unity Movement, our sister denomination. Catherine Ponder, is a great prosperity teacher in Unity. Mary Mannon Morrissey, who created a huge independent New Thought center. Eric Butterworth, Unity minister in New York. And my very own Kathy Ann Lewis up in Seattle. All of them teach this. They all work it. I teach it because I work it. And guess what it is? It's tithing. Those of you who are raised in traditional conservative churches, part of you goes, oh, I knew it. I thought this church was different, and I knew it. But let's, if this is why I said this is the just saying talk. Just saying. First, let's say, what is tithing? Tithing is giving 10% of all our income to where we are spiritually fed. Giving 10% of our income to where we are spiritually fed. Now, if I'm doing my job right, that means a lot of your tithe will come into this center. But it isn't always to a church. I tithe to my friends when I feel lifted and inspired. I tithe to other ministers who write and send out things that I might sort of take and adapt for Sunday morning. So I tithe to where I get my spiritual food, and I tithe to our organization because that is what continues to give me spiritual food in the teachings of Science of Mind and Ernest Holmes. So tithing is giving to where you are spiritually fed. Now, notice, that's not charity. Tithing is not giving to charity and good causes. Doesn't mean we shouldn't. But many people say if you tithe to need, if part of your tithe goes to need, then you are feeding need. The tithe, as most of you know, comes from the Hebrew scriptures, where they would give a tithe to support actually the priests, the Levitical priests in the early days. But what it really is, and of course we know in tribal cultures too, that there's always those offerings presented to the gods. And it is simply out of that idea that everything we have comes from spirit. Everything. Did you make the sun? Did you make the plants? Did you create the fish and the cows and whatever else we eat? Did you create the person in your life that you love? I didn't. And I believe that there is a creator, there is an infinite power and presence that created all of this. And that is the source of all that comes into my life. So in acknowledgement of that, I can't give it to God. And I'm certainly not going to stand here and say this center is a stand-in for God. But that's why I love the definition of giving to where I am spiritually fed. To the persons and institutions where I am spiritually fed. Where I get reminded of the truth of who I am, the truth of the divine. So that's the difference between charity. Charity, I give on top of my tithe. I give to organizations, but I don't call that my tithe. Now here's what finally got Edwine's peaked, because she was a single mom working 2 jobs, 16 hours a day, and couldn't keep food on the table. And she resisted this tithing thing, as did Merriman and Morrissey. They both talk about how this was the last thing they did. You know, they'd heard about it, but they didn't want anybody getting their hands on their money. I was like, this is just a conspiracy on the part of the churches to make them wealthy. And then she really, when one of her ministers finally said, you know what, you haven't tried it yet, have you? She admitted she hadn't. And she went back and looked at Malachi, chapter 3, verse 10, and this is in the Hebrew scriptures, also known as the Old Testament. Bring the tithes into the storehouse, and I will open the windows of heaven and pour out a blessing so great that there will not be room for them all. Prove me now. And if you look at the original English, it was put into the prove me nows in the middle, and God says, bring the tithes, prove me now if I won't do this. Just see. That this is a promise of the infinite. That when we're willing to give first, and really, God's given first, so we're not even giving first, we're just kidding ourselves. But when we are willing to give, we will receive multiplied, pressed down, and flowing over. Multiplied, pressed down, and flowing over. Now, why is it 10%? Well, historically, biblically, it was 10%. But I have a good friend up in Seattle, Reverend Sharon Ramey, who her favorite thing is to teach tithing. I mean, she just gets a sparkle. She is running all over the room because she loves it so much. And it just made me, I giggled the whole time watching her do a tithing seminar because it just is her favorite thing. She says, think about it. If it were 1%, everybody could do it. You wouldn't miss it. You wouldn't know. It wouldn't test you. She said, it's like this. She lives in a houseboat in Seattle. And, people really do live in houseboats in some of the lakes in Seattle. And there are 47 steps up from her houseboat to get to the street. And she said, it's so great to have those 47 steps because she always knows how fit she is. If there were only 5 or 10 steps, she would get up them and not really notice if she slowly, and she's probably early 60s now, she wouldn't notice if she was getting out of shape. But boy, with those 47, she knows. And so she reckons it's the same way with 10%. Giving 10%, subtracting that's a number we notice. That's a number that gives us pause. If it didn't give us pause, what would it do? We don't prove our faith with pebbles. I don't know about you, but I don't think this is going to build a bicep. Hey, I'm exercising. However, well, I don't lift something this heavy. But, this doesn't weigh very much. So it doesn't do anything. 10% is enough of a number that we get backed up, don't we? You just don't raise your hand, but some of you, we get backed up by that number because it's bigger. That's why, because it tests us. So it's okay that you resist this. Like I said, Edwene did. And when she started doing it, she was scared to death. And I'll talk a little more about that. She was freaked out. She said, this makes no sense. But okay. Actually, I will talk about this now. She said, okay, big fella. She and God were on a very intimate basis. She said, okay, big fella, I'm going to try this out for 6 months. You better produce, because my little girl's got to eat. See, she didn't do any oh, if it's thy will. She just said, okay. And even though we teach God is within, it's easier to have that kind of conversation if you pretend that God is separate. She has those kind of conversations with him. And you know what? God can take it. If you read the Hebrew scriptures and that David we talked about in the Psalms the other week, he was always yelling at God. Whining at God, yelling at God. It's okay. So God can take it. So you could say, that promise in Malachi? I'm holding you to that. You can do that. That's okay. You can do that. So, that's the setup. But why do we think this is powerful? It's actually a fabulous opportunity. And I'm going to tell you about what it's an opportunity to do. It's an opportunity for each of us. And the first thing is it's an opportunity for us to heal what Lynn Twist, who's a contemporary and younger writer about money, what Lynn Twist calls the default thought, the default waking thought that almost all of us have is either I'm not enough or there's not enough. And when we work with tithing, that allows us to start testing that and healing levels of it. So if any of you have felt like I'm not enough, the thought stops you in life, tithing is a great way to start working with that. Secondly, it is the best way I know to heal our relationship with money. And let's face it, in this country especially, but I think in all of Western society, in this culture, our relationship with money is often kind of whacked. It's the place where we tend to be the most conflicted. We have stuff around it. And if you think about it, because if we want our lives to be rich and full, and we know that, for example, to be more loving, that we partner with God, that we open to God to let that love that God is be through us, wouldn't we want to partner with God in our finances? Just saying. That many of us, our money, the amount in our lives, our relationship with it, that's where we feel least whole. And one of the main reasons that I am here, that we are here as a center, is to move you into knowing that you are whole, complete, and perfect now in all your relationships, including money. That tithing is the best way to become the master of your money instead of money mastering you. Wouldn't you like to have your life be about you, not about thinking about what your money allows you to do? In the workshop, we'll have a chance to go more individually and more deeply into what kind of our individual beliefs are about money. So if that is a major issue for you, that you may want to join us. The third opportunity that tithing gives, it is for us really to step into, as I mentioned earlier, that idea of thriving. To let go of our littleness and really step out and have the larger life that, as I tell you over and over again, our founder, Ernest Holmes, always says is the divine urge to express fully through us. To have a life where it is the fullness of everything and where we are living what the master teacher Jesus said, I am come that ye might have life and have it more abundantly. Not narrow, not sanctimoniously, but abundantly. And as we go through these weeks, the other spiritual laws will also be supporting that thriving, full, free life. Finally, tithing, and I've been alluding to this, is the greatest opportunity. In fact, it's the supreme way to build our faith. That is the way that we keep God before us. We need to be conscious because when money comes in, we tithe on it. And we tithe, that's the way that we focus on God. Some of you know, if you have Jewish friends, they may have a little mezuzah on their door. It's a little depiction of the Torah, the books of their Bible, and that they will kiss it upon leaving, and well, they'll go like that, upon leaving and entering, so their mind can be stayed on God. As many of you know, devout Muslims pray 5 times a day to help their minds be stayed on God. I'm trying to remember if it's from the Hebrew scriptures or the Christian scriptures. It is said, "Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee." And if you're worrying about your finances, you're not going to be in perfect peace. So tithing becomes one more way that we keep that presence of spirit before us. That we know that God is our partner. And here's the thing, God doesn't care. This isn't about pleasing God. Tithing is not about pleasing God. And as I said, God doesn't use your money. But it is about our awareness of God. And the awareness of God is what heals. The awareness of God is what opens us up to wholeness. It is the awareness of God that creates the kingdom of heaven on earth where we walk. Edwene says it this way: putting God first is a dynamic act of courage. When you do so, your faith and your ability to stretch yourself to move forward and expand your vision of yourself and your life increases 100-fold. That's a big mouthful. Let me say it again. Putting God first is a dynamic act of courage. When you do so, your faith and your abilities to stretch yourself to move forward and expand that vision of yourself and your life increases 100-fold. And that's what we're about doing. It is expanding our vision of ourself and our lives. Ernest Holmes said, "The one who can fling himself into the infinite, not like an idiot, but consciously, mindfully fling oneself into the infinite, is the one whose life truly expands." And that is the proving of God. A few little tips. We'll talk about more tips in the workshop. If you're going to take on tithing, and just saying, it's been working for people, give it 6 months. Do you go to the gym once and go, "Well, I don't see any muscles now. Forget this, I'm not going"? No, you give it time to work. And you pay attention. Because this is how you know it's this God stuff. You go along and do your tithing and you think you're expecting some money to come from this direction. And then it comes, something wild and weird comes from over here. I mean, there are countless stories about people receiving refunds they didn't know they were due for. Or some aunt or long-lost relative dying and leaving them $10,000 in their will. I mean, just the weirdest things. And they go, "Well, but I didn't get that raise I wanted at work, so this tithing thing isn't working." No, it shows up in these wild ways. That's what I love about God. God's wild. And maybe it's just $5 here or $10 there. But pay attention to those dribs and drabs because they add up too. In fact, Edwene advises you keep a little notebook so you can pay attention to every dime that comes your way. And then you know that you're going to tithe on that. You can bring a penny and put it into our unexpected income jar that goes into our building fund. You can do that. Nobody's going to walk up and laugh at you. But it keeps you in integrity. And it's not that God's going to punish you, But as we show our willingness, as you give, you've got an open hand. When you're like this, how can you receive anything? If you're like this, holding it to yourself, you can't receive anything. The open hand. Let's see if I've got any more tips that I want to give you. Yeah. Oh, tithe first before the bills. Write that check out. And we build our attitude. And yet it's important to remember that if we tithe like this, okay, I'm giving just so I can get, then we're sending some kind of wacky messages. So if we can tithe, it's still, if you decide to take on this experiment, it's between you and God. And so it's about you playing, okay, I'm going to try trusting you as my partner. I'm going to try trusting you as my partner in abundance. And it's okay if you're as I said, if you're scared or resistant, but just say, okay, I'm trying this now. And what I want for all of us is to prove God in our lives. It's your decision about whether you want to experiment with this thing called tithing. And as I said, so many teachers over the years, because this gets us in a place where we live, a scary place, it's a powerful way to prove it. But what I want for each of us is to know that our lives are full and free, and that we can create whatever lives we are longing to live and express. And that we prove God every day, not in the sense of prove it, but we prove it so we know it is the hands that hold us through life, that we can trust, and that we truly, truly can move forward in joy. So, let's move within together. As I am so grateful that wherever I go, Spirit is. There is no time, no place that I can outrun that infinite, that divine. There is no place where God is not. And I am also grateful to know that I cannot outgive God. No way. And so knowing that that givingness of God is always happening, and that I live in an abundant universe where, as there are infinite melodies to download, an infinite species, an infinite number of raindrops, an infinite sand on the beach, an infinite stars in the skies, an abundance of them, that there is abundance of good for my life now. And so in recognition that as a child of God, I inherit the kingdom, I open to live in that knowing of my abundance. And I open to joyfully give of my good, knowing that as I give, I initiate a flow, and that flow moves back into my life, pressed down and flowing over. I allow God to prove itself in my life. I am open. and I am blessed. And I know that this truth for me and for anyone here who wishes to accept it for them, that we move together into that glorious, full, free life. I claim it for myself. I claim it for anyone and everyone here, and I claim it for all the world. And know that as I speak believing, my word is accepted by a law that is the law of cause and effect that takes my word and makes it so. I give thanks for this knowing, and so it is.